Good evening, everybody. A really warm welcome. Well, not so warm, a bit wet, rainy, but warm in here. Welcome to the Goldsmiths Centre. My name's Charlotte Dew. I'm the Public Programme Manager here. It's lovely to see you all this evening for our June Creative Links on the subject of branding. We were really interested to run a session on this, not least because it's one of those sections of your business that when you're starting out, you really need to give some thought to, but perhaps as a creative person, it's not your natural area of thought. So this evening, we're going to do a number of things. We're going to explore what we mean by branding. We're going to look at different ways that you might work with branding companies. If you have even a small amount of money to spend, how might you spend that? What would be the best use of that money? And we're also going to question, in this age of really changing technologies and different ways of communication, how has branding changed, and how do we keep up with that in terms of making sure that you are branded in the right way? So, our lovely panel. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their work with branding. We have, I think, hopefully an interesting cross-section of experience. I'm going to ask Kelly. They were tossing a coin earlier for who would start, but I've opted to go to the far end. So Kelly Seymour has her own brand, Cult of Youth, so comes at this from a very personal perspective. So Kelly, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience of branding?
Hi, I'm Kelly. I've got a brand called Cult of Youth. I've been making jewellery for about 7-8 years. I started out at Portobello Market. I then got picked up by Urban Outfitters. I did a few seasons for them. And then I had my son Elvis, who's nearly 4. And I decided to go in a different direction, which was to retail myself. So I set my website up and really have focused on the social side, so Instagram, and it's growing quite well, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying that side of it. It's really fun. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Kelly. And next we have Steve Gerardo, who has his own. How would you describe your studio, Evolve Studio? It's branding and creative practice.
A studio.
A studio.
Almost.
So Steve.
Not an agency or anything like that. So Evolve Studio has been going for around 2 years, I think. And before that, did a mixture of client and agency side, working as creative director on lots of luxury, fashion and technology brands, which we've continued to do through Envol, so the same sort of client list. We work across 3 core sectors, really, brand development and branding, so looking at things more strategically and looking at positioning and stuff like this, and then how that actually manifests into the visual identity and how it looks and feels. Do a lot of integrated campaign work, again, so how we can kind of create beautiful visuals and campaign work based on a targeted audience and how that sort of comes to life across all the different channels, from digital to retail, etc. And experiential, so doing events and pop-ups and stuff like this. So it's quite a broad range, so we're quite lucky to be able to do that. That's us.
Brilliant, thanks, Steve. So now we've got Elizabeth de Groot, who works for Valet de Mur and Object Emotion. And so, Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your roles? Thank you.
So I'm Elizabeth de Groot, as you said. I work for Valerie de Mur. I'm second in command at her agency and her jewellery gallery. So at the agency, mostly my role is to act as a consultant to both interior and exterior brands, the brands that we don't represent. And usually part of that process involves some element of branding, whether it's tweaking branding or completely rebranding or creating a new brand. And then I also act as assistant director for Object Emotional, which is the jewellery gallery where we present at art and design shows around the world.
Great, thank you very much. And last but not least, Cara Penn, who works for, or is the director of Fit Director, Fit Creative.
My card says anyway.
So, Cara, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your?
Yes, and they all have really impressive CVs, so they should be saying more about themselves. So I'm qualified trained graphic designer. I worked for 10 years for large agencies and then set up with my partner, Jonathan, who's just there, our own agency. And I was very lucky, actually, to have worked across a huge range of sectors. So I have done telecoms, and I've done energy companies, and I've done things that were very impressive, and I was very lucky at it. And I worked for 2 years out in the Middle East, running an agency out there, before setting up ours. And now we work with a real cross-section of kind of clients in the charity sector. We do cultural brands, and we also do educational brands. And for us, it's about kind of working with clients long-term and getting to understand them and appreciating what they need to achieve. So I'm a real kind of nerdy brand obsessive, and I'm probably more commercial than you lot in terms of the fact that I've been trained to do a brand process and learn to understand how to create strong brands for clients.
I guess we're all here because we care about branding and I guess perceive it to be important. So my next question is, how much is branding to do with your success? So how much can it influence your success? Who'd like to start?
So I think when you're a small designer and you're first starting off, I think you can be quite careful about the way you test and implement your branding, and you don't need to spend a lot initially, I don't think. I think you can, as long as you establish what your DNA is, what your values are, what your unique selling point is in your product, what is unique about your product, and what are you trying to put out there that you don't feel is already there, then as long as you've really established that and you really thoroughly and rigorously understand that, then I think you can develop within your own means the aspects that surround it. And I think as you grow, branding remains important, but it has to be something that is true to your DNA, and it has to be something that helps you communicate, as we were saying, like in this market, something that differentiates you and something that helps you communicate your values and what your product is about. But it's part of success. It's not. I mean, I would say product is the first thing.
Different agencies have got like different systems for creating branding. So because I come from big agency background, we will have had systems that we use, brand pyramids and all of these kinds of things, and they are just purely formulas in order to help you develop and understand your positioning. So that's what your values are, what you stand for, what you're trying to sell. And then we used to call it the golden triangle. So you have your product as 1/3, 33 and a third, whatever. You have your branding as the other third, and you have your marketing as the final third. So you put those three together, and then you have the magic perfect business, apparently.
I think it's important, but yeah, I definitely think that product is the most important. I don't know whether, for me, I tend to lead with product, but there's always a story behind everything. So it kind of comes hand in hand. And I think that people are looking for something to have a story now. It's not just kind of like that this throwaway fast fashion. So the same way that Aesop, kind of, that they use the bricks made and the laundrette. It's lovely and it makes you kind of feel a feeling. I think that's just as important.
It depends on the sector you're talking about, right? Because I went to a talk with Sharmadine Reed, who used to own War Nails, and she was saying almost all nail polishes are made in something like 3 factories in the world. So basically nail polish is all about branding. Yeah. So it's not about the quality of your product, but with jewellery, I really feel it is about your product and it is about having something distinctive.
And we've talked a lot about emotion and storytelling and what might sit behind a brand. But when you're thinking about it, maybe the thing that I most immediately think of is the name and the logo. But when we talk about branding, what are the different elements that a new brand should be working on? What are all those different bits? How does it work through the different activities that they're taking on?
How many of you guys know what it means, branding? Like, can you name another thing apart from the name and the logo? Just anything. Packaging. Oh, sorry. Packaging, yeah. Like interiors. Product, service, yeah. The interiors, the uniform, your van livery, your website, the colours, the photography, how people answer the phone. It's the work. It's all these elements coming together, right? And sometimes people think that's like marketing. Marketing is an execution of your brand. It's pulling lots of those elements together and putting it together. But when we're talking brand, it means all of it. You know, it means every aesthetic element, every tangible way somebody's going to experience it. So it's enormous. And using the word brand and banding it around like the way people do, it's just irritating sometimes.
I think for us, we usually we use the word brand and then something else. So we're usually, when we're working with brands, we talk about, first of all, we look at developing brand DNA and look at really understanding what the brand is about. And then we will look at usually product, because that's usually the most important, the first thing you look at. And then part of the process of understanding how we're going to bring that product to market is usually brand identity. So I think what we would do is we, as I said, like usually follow that word brand with something else. And you're looking at, when we talk about brand identity, we're usually talking about, yes, logo, but also the applications of that brand identity. So you're thinking about packaging and how that relates to your product. You're thinking about the little notes that might go in with your packaging, how you're communicating your brand story, how it's applied to your website, how it's applied to your Instagram. And then usually imagery comes somewhere within that as well. So like campaign, videos, any content that you're producing is usually brand related.
Don't think of that as like a linear process. It's not like a one-time solution that you just have to like run across everything. Like there's the new buzz phrase is Omnichannel, and it's basically a representation of how we behave as customers in the real world. And it means that customers can enter your brand at any point. It's not you open something in a magazine and then you click the link on the website because it said click the, you know. So it's more of a circular journey. People come in at any point, and so it's a case of thinking very holistically about how you want to do that. And a sheer winner outside of developing your core identity in terms of visual sense, and your visual narrative and your DNA is looking at content and how you can generate content as a way to start conversations.
I think it's really interesting because, and I was particularly, one of the reasons why we really were keen to have Kelly on the panel is that idea of to what extent the brand becomes you as the person, and if you're not comfortable with you as the person becoming the brand, how do you deal with that? You know, sort of, do you need to be your brand if you're a sole trader? So I don't know, Kelly, if you want to tell us a bit about how you've approached that, because I think it's really interesting, and then I'd be interested in the rest of the panel's views on the importance of that.
I think there is a separation. There definitely, because obviously you decide what you share, and I like to share various aspects, but there's things that I don't talk about, and you know, things that I don't want to like necessarily share or aren't relevant really. But I mean, motherhood is a massive part of what I share, and being a small business owner and sharing all the kind of, yeah, this is amazing, I'm doing this, but also, God, this is like, you know, this is galling, and sharing that part of it. And I feel like Instagram's a great tool for that, but also there aren't, you know, it can sometimes not be as real on Instagram. So it's kind of nice to be able to share all sides of things. But yeah, I think you are able to, it depends how you come at it. I enjoy that personal, because as well, if say if Elvis isn't well, I can be like, guys, my kid's ill and there's going to be a delay on your orders, really sorry, like I'll get you back, you know, like thanks for being patient. And that works with me as much as, you know, like giving that side. But if you're not comfortable with that, you don't need to. I think so long as you're sharing the important parts of what you want to share, you don't have to give it all.
Often part of what we're doing when we're consulting with jewelry brands is looking at Instagram, because it is such a big part of business today. And often sometimes we work with founders who are more comfortable sharing themselves, sharing pictures of themselves, as you said, people by people. So obviously, if you can connect your brand to yourself, and particularly with jewelry, it's such a personal product. And often jewelry brands, I'm sure you will have seen, most jewelry brands carry the name of the designer. So then it is, in that case, it has to have something personal, right? Because it's about you, and it's about you as a brand. But we also do work with lots of jewelry designers where their brand carries their name, but they're not that comfortable with being very open with the general public. So they don't really want to share pictures of themselves, or at least not very often. They don't want to really share pictures of their lives. But there are other ways, as you said, to do that. There's, also you mentioned sharing like inspirations, sharing things, process, sharing mood board, sharing, we work with one brand that uses found objects in their jewelry, so sharing stories of where you find it, making sure that you communicate the personal things and the things that are unique to your brand and unique to your point of view, and having a personal tone of voice in Instagram as well, I think is really key. But it doesn't always have to be like pictures of yourself if you don't feel comfortable with that.
Stories are a great way, like a great entry, if you want to kind of keep your feed really clean or whatever, but stories are a kind of real great way to show the behind the scenes, or the making behind or just you as a brand, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, because as a design agency, we always thought everything had to be pristine that we did for our clients, and that there was a little bit of black magic going on. It's like, oh yes, it just turned out perfect. And actually, we literally only this year launched a kind of section which was behind the scenes on our own website, which just showed actual process happening in our studio, which we found people really interested in. And we thought it was incredibly dull and normal and average because it's what we do all the time. And then we were surprised that people were really, oh, you're literally hand cutting that out in the studio. Yeah, well, we have to test it out. How do you think we got it? We didn't it didn't magically turn out perfect the first time round. So I think that's also part of kind of human nature, and also the part of the evolving, shifting brand landscape, that people want to genuinely buy you, want to believe in you as a person, whether you're a small individual maker or you've got a whole team working for you. They still want to buy those values, and they still want to know that there's some truth there. So that's why they want that behind the scenes.
It's just taking away the smoke and mirrors, I think. It's just,
We've all got no time. We all have less time for nonsense through brands these days. We're all the same. We don't want to see that. It's not what we want. So no one wants to see the red Coca-Cola ad anymore. We're done. We're over it. Goodbye.
Thank you. So we've touched on Instagram, and that's obviously something that's very important across the board. But in these sort of changing times and different ways of communication, are there any other aspects of thinking around branding that you think have altered? Are there any, or is it, as Cara said, the same as the London Underground in the early 1900s? Is it the same?
I think Steve touched on something that has been made really important by social media, which is content creation. And I think that's really the amount of content you need to generate now as a brand, even as a small brand, has changed vastly in the last 4 or 5 years. I think also social media has meant that brands have become more accessible, which means small brands are more discoverable, which is great, but also means you have to be more transparent and more accountable. So I think it has, in a few ways, social media has changed how you have to behave.
It's really influenced demographic as well. So if you think, like, not so long ago, we'd sit there and say there's baby boomers, there's Generation X, there's millennials and all these sorts of things. And the latest is Gen Z, and we think it's all a bunch of young kids and all this kind of thing. And it is. But more interestingly, and this is again like the shift in how we interact and live our lives, is Gen Z is actually it's a state of mind thing. So my mum, she's on Facebook, she's on WhatsApp, she texts, she does emojis and all these kinds of things, right? She's youthfully present is what my mum is, and therefore she's part of Gen Z. She's part of that culture. She's part of being relevant today. And that's like a really important thing to bear in mind. So when you're going out there, and a lot of big brands that pay a lot of money for customer segmentation and trying to understand about who their customers are, might be, and things like this, the easiest thing to do is obviously go and chat to people, because that's free, and you're not going to be spending a lot of money on that anytime soon, because you need big revenues before you do this. But the point being is that there is no demographic, really, in essence, depending on how you want to target things. If you want to target a 60-plus audience, and of course there's a lot of things to think of. But demographic-wise, it's a really open field now, and being relevant and is the now, at least for now.
I've got a really silly, pointless, well, not pointless, small comment about social media. Make sure your logo fits into a really small square. Right? So it's something where every time we do a brand, we have to like teach our clients. And I think, no, surely I know you're on social media, so you must know this stuff. So that's a minor thing. But the other one is about where you're selling. So obviously you kind of, you will have a global platform by being online, but you need to look at the markets that are buying design. So obviously the B word is not to be spoken about here, but that is going to make it harder for you to sell. It's just a fact. So you need to be looking at Saudi, China, a couple of other countries I needed to remember. I did make notes. Very smart. In terms of where you're selling, so that you actually can grow your business faster. So think about those audiences a bit. Oh yeah, UAE and South Korea. They're the ones who are buying, and they're the ones who have money.
Well, it's interesting that's where the money is. We're developing an event at the moment for November where we're going to look at how you go about starting to work internationally, because we recognise that's a really important thing to do. And obviously, as we've spoken about, using online platforms enables that largely. You've spoken a bit about working with agencies. So for the uninitiated, where would you even begin to look? I mean, we can all Google it and see what comes up, but what would your advice be for finding this right one to sit down and have the conversation with?
And whatever you do, don't ask for an agency on LinkedIn. You will just get 3,000 replies. You know, and also you won't be able to afford them. Let's be honest. Yeah, just do more local sourcing. So obviously, ask around, get a recommendation would be best. But otherwise, like, try and find locally to you, because then you're more likely to get somebody who's going to fit your budget. Oh, and I wrote this one down. Be transparent about your budget. Don't exaggerate, don't fib. If you literally have £500, then say it from the offset, because then you're not wasting your time and you're not wasting their time, because otherwise you're going to spend, a good hour meeting kind of pussyfooting around each other without actually saying, look, I've got £500, what can actually be achieved for £500?
But the good thing about being upfront about that is, like I say, we all love what we do. And so, if someone was to approach our studio and we absolutely love what they do and they said, I got 500 quid, so what? It doesn't matter. Yeah, if there's a connection, if we're getting along, if it's a great product, then of course that's why we get out of bed in the morning. So transparency is key, and that's why, because more often than not it will lead to a positive thing and not someone just sort of slamming the door in the face. Yeah, you have to deal with rejection, but get that from your suppliers or something. Don't find that in creatives, because that shouldn't be the way. There should at least be a free bit of advice in it for you.
And so the other thread that I think is quite interesting is this idea of evolving brands and how you keep it fresh. And I think it's quite interesting, you, Steve, saying you don't want to do away with it too quickly. You don't want to go too quick. But then if you've been in business for a period of time, when is it right to make changes? How do you know, the pace at which change is useful to keeping your brand fresh?
So the bottom line is, if your business target, financial target, is bigger than you're achieving, that's the time you need to evolve. Clearly, obviously, that's the time to spend some money. It's like, okay, I want to make more than I'm making now. Don't be ridiculous. Don't say you want to make 20 times the amount of money by next year. It's not going to happen. Well, it might do, and I'd be very impressed if it did. But that's the kind of right time to do it, and that's the right time to maybe get an agency on board. So we had I might have the slides. We had a client, Beauty and the Bib, who was, there they are, who was a baby company, and they'd had a review done where they'd been told by, I think it was UK Export, that they could make a lot more money exporting abroad, but their brand wasn't strong enough. So they came to us for that, and we evolved. We understood actually that the bibs that they were trying to sell, that they were trying to sell down in Greenwich Market, they hadn't quite realised that they were more gifts than they were your mum who's going to buy a 5-pack of bibs from Asda. And we, by working with them on that business strategy, we understood therefore the brand strategy needed to raise the standard of it and make it more a gift thing. And I think there's some other slides which show basically we were like, well, clearly you need to do gift vouchers and you need to do gift packaging and you need to put sets together, and it's your kind of auntie who doesn't have babies who's going to come along and spend 80 quid because you're not, because you're busy buying nappies. And that was a revelation to them, and that was the good use of a design agency, was to kind of get them to put the business strategy in place and then develop the brand, and that's what they did.
I think for us as well, because with the agency side of our business, we've worked with brands that are very small and have grown throughout their time with us. And I think possibly Kelly's found this as well. To a certain extent, your branding grows as it needs to, because you get a retailer, say you're working with Harrods or Matches or whatever, and you have to have packaging and you have to have a care note that goes in the packaging. So then that develops from the logo that you had maybe when you initially started out. You have to think about when you're presenting your brand to press, you have to think about how you're presenting your brand in a lookbook. So your lookbook evolves and how you use your imagery evolves. I think when you start to think about having your own retail platform, maybe your branding evolves again, because you have to think about all of the point of sale aspects you have to your branding. When you think about having a website, often for small brands, it evolves as it has to,
So
as
it's
it
all
needs
the time
to.
then.
It's all the time, but it's more like, I think for small brands who don't always set up with a lot of funding behind them, you kind of do it as and when you.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that makes it less intense initially, because you can grow as you go. So right now I've always shot everything on my iPhone, but I need some pack shots for print, so I'm going to do that, and it's sort of something that I haven't necessarily needed before, but you kind of go, oh okay, I need to do that now, and you kind of take each bit as you need to do it. Yeah.